Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Believe in Hawks episode. And as we continue to cover the Atlanta Hawks offseason, I had to bring another special guest onto the show, Sam Amico from Hoopswire, NBA senior writer for them. Welcome into the show, sir. How are you doing today?
Good, Bryce. Here we are, early July, and there's still tons of NBA stuff to cover. I just feel like there's no rest, which I like. It's better this way than downtime. But all kinds of stuff going on in the NBA early July, and I suspect that'll continue till late July.
Yeah, I mean, hey, this is the most active time. Obviously, summer league's is already started, and it's gonna, we're getting into full gear with all of that, and so. This is a time where they say if you love basketball, you're a real junkie. You're a real junkie at this point, outside of just the free agency and trades that potentially could still maybe come at this point. But obviously, one of the major teams in the cycle of the offseason has been the Atlanta Hawks. A lot of rumors since getting the first pick, going through the NBA draft, now going into free agency. And so before we get into specific things, I just wanted to ask you about so far the Atlanta Hawks offseason. What has been your thoughts on what they've done? Do you like the direction they're going in? Do you hate it? Where are you feeling right now with the moves that Landry Field and company has made so far with this team?
Well, I mean, you first heard that they were going to try to trade Dejounte Murray before the trade deadline in February. And at that time, he was going to the Lakers. That's what everybody was saying. He's getting traded to the Lakers. But, and then you hear after the season that they're going to trade either Young or Murray or both. And you just kind of kept waiting to see what was going to develop. I think that they showed, look, they tried. I thought the deal for Murray initially was a good deal. But, at some point, and they're both good players, they get along very well. It's just how do they fit? And I think after a couple of years, you figured, this probably isn't the match we're looking for. I think if you're going to trade one or the other, the guy to trade would have been Murray. As good as he is, I just think Trae Young, is on a different level from him, slightly different, but a better player all around and the face of the franchise. And I think you have a lot more explaining to do if you traded Trae Young. So, look, you didn't get much back for Murray in this, on paper. But what you're looking for, if you're Atlanta, is a fit, right? You're hoping that Dyson Daniels develops into a nice player. You're hoping Larry Nance Jr. can help you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe E.J. Liddell, who had a lot of promise coming into the NBA before blowing out his knee with New Orleans, maybe he develops. So you're looking at, a couple guys there in Daniels and Liddell that you have your fingers crossed that they can develop into something, at least as rotational players. Larry Nance Jr., you already know what he can do. Defender, rebounder, glue guy. So, if you're Atlanta, you got at least two pretty nice bench players there. And I really think that there's probably some more moves on the way. I feel like that was just a start to kind of what they're looking to do. But, I think they got to start. And to me, it seems like, and I could be totally wrong here, but it seems like they want to keep Trae Young and keep him as the face of the franchise and continue to build around him that way. But look, they had been spinning their wheels, right? I mean, they got to the Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago, seemed kind of on the up and up, and then they made the Murray trade, and it just didn't develop like they'd hoped. And I think that it makes sense that they're trying to shake it up a little bit right now.
Yeah, and I mean, and in this business, you took a chance and it didn't work out. And like you said, it happens in this league, And I think some fans want them to be aggressive and swing again. But, obviously if you missed last time, you may be more careful this time around. So I think that's important. And to mention, I think the biggest person from that trade that you mentioned with DJ, I think is Dyson. I think Hawks were one of the worst teams at the point of attack last year. And Dyson Daniels, a lot of people from the New Orleans side I've talked to says that he is immediately probably the best point of attack defender we have now. That's one thing that he can do is defend the ball. It's just offensively, he has a ways to go. And if that works out, then he can develop into a really nice player. But so speaking of that trade, though, today we learned that the Pelicans wanted Clint or Kongwu. That's what they're saying. That was something they wanted. And the Hawks also did not want to trade for Brandon Ingram, which was a person that was connected to him a lot because of the contract extension. The big thing Pelicans hold up, a lot of teams hold up, is nobody wants to pay Brandon Ingram $50 million. Right. What are your thoughts on that? Are you kind of like, yeah, I understand that. I agree with that decision. Or do you feel like the Hawks maybe should have just, hey, if you need to give up Capella or Kongu and get Ingram and bring another guy in here, I would have did it.
Yeah, no, I think, with the rise of Jalen Johnson, that you want to be really careful with somebody like a Brandon Ingram. Like I said, it's not just the Atlanta Hawks, it's the New Orleans Pelicans that don't want to pay him that. They've been trying to trade him, it sounds like, and are unable to move him for that very reason. So, I think that was probably a wise move on the Hawks' part. Again, like I said, you don't want to rush into something that really. And Brandon Ingram, fine player, obviously, borderline all-star when he can stay healthy, but you don't want to handcuff yourself. And does it move the needle enough for you to make that move and risk, with this whole contract situation, risk kind of handcuffing yourself, whether you sign him to that max deal or, which would really be handcuffing yourself, or, potentially losing him for nothing. At some point. So, and look, the Hawks are filled, other than Trae Young, they're full of guys who are pretty good, but aren't all-stars. Capella, Okongwu, DeAndre Hunter, these kind of guys, Bogdanovich, these are all really good players, but, they don't have that. And it seems like, again, Jalen Johnson clearly seems like a guy on the rise, but it just seems like there's some other move out there where they're going to potentially make a splash here without having to move Trae Young. So, yeah, I think that you did the right thing if you're Atlanta and say, no, look, we'll give you DJ for these guys, and perhaps it seems like set ourselves up for another move. And it's not, look, we've seen it in the NBA nowadays. It's not about having three superstars. Otherwise, the Phoenix Suns would have won the championship. It's not about having three big names and big contracts. It's all about fit. And we've really seen that a lot over the course of the NBA over the past few years, how much parity there is with the Denver Nuggets winning a championship, Miami Heat, going to the finals, Dallas Mavericks going to the finals, Suns and Bucks. Those teams all have one really good player, but everybody else around them fits. And that's really, it seems like in today's NBA with the new collective bargaining agreement, you want to be wise about how you build and not overspend. So I think that the fact that the Hawks have taken, to this point, a fairly cautious approach has been okay.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you mentioned the CB. I've said that, like you said, it changes the way teams build their rosters. You can't just put a bunch of star players together and have lack of depth and think that's going to get through, or else the Suns would have had some more success. I think, a team like Golden State, who's paid the luxury tax for years, was even trying to be like, all right, let's start trying to, in some way, cut some cost here. Obviously with Klay Thompson walking. And I'm sure, I know you covered Cleveland a little bit more closely in your time. I'm sure with Donovan's contract and maybe some other potential contracts on the rise, they got to make decisions. So it's impacting so many teams in this league. In Atlanta, I've always said the next big extension you're probably going to give is Jalen Johnson. So you have to keep that in mind when acquiring players, because I'm sure they don't want to be a second apron team. And obviously, Tony Wrestler's gotten some heat for not willing to want to pay tax in general, but, that's kind of how things go. But, talking about the tax, I think a couple of players that we've mentioned for the Hawks that people have wondered about them moving has been Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter. I want to start on Clint Capella first. Obviously, he was mentioned in the Pelicans trade. Do you, at this moment still in time, do you sense there is a market for Capella? Obviously, free agency's gone by a little bit. Some teams have signed some centers, drafted some centers. A guy who's on an expiring deal this year. Do you still see value for Clint Capella around for the Hawks to potentially make a move?
Yeah, there's certainly value anytime you have a starting caliber center who's athletic, lob finisher, good defender, protects the basket. Those you're always trying to find those type of players. So I'm sure there's a market out there for him. Look, New Orleans really, really obviously still after that deal needs a center. They have nobody. So I don't know that, that those sides will revisit things, but the potential is there. And if you're Atlanta, it's like, we've got to ask ourselves, are we getting back equal value? This is a market where teams are trying to obviously right now cut costs a little bit, but to me, it's the market's still there. I just think at this point, you're probably not getting back the same type of player for Capella that you're giving up. Now, if you could get 2 or 3 players back for him, then that's something else to consider. But there are a lot of teams right now, that are kind of figuring things out in the middle. Obviously, New Orleans won. Portland has like 6 centers now. So, I mean, there's something there where maybe you could get a couple of guys back for one. But it doesn't sound to me like the Hawks have been overly aggressive in terms of shopping Capella. But I think that teams have been calling them.
And speaking of that, too, the other guy I mentioned, DeAndre Hunter, he's been a guy who, I mean, I've heard for years has been available. But again, I don't think the Hawks have aggressively shopped him. A guy who some people will say with his draft pick selection, hasn't reached the expectations. But at the same time, I think he's a solid player in this league. I don't think he's bad. I just, he's just solid. And so do you also maybe feel that exact same way about DeAndre? Just there's a market, still got to figure some things out, because he's playing a very valuable position in this league, wing. Everybody feels like needs wings. They want wings. He is a guy who, for the majority of last season, shot 40% from 3. He improved that part of his game, so that can make his value go up a little bit more, and et cetera.
Yeah, no, and that's true. He's, the NBA is so wing and perimeter oriented now. And he has his moments, certainly, where he has, I saw him one game this year against Cleveland, where he just, for about 5 to 8 minutes kind of looked like Michael Jordan, and then he went back to just being steady. But he's always steady. He's a hard worker in terms of on the court. He's, there's never any questions about effort or any of that. He's just, and I don't want to call him streaky, but it's just more like a guy who's just kind of out there for a while. Then he'll have some good moments, and then he goes back to being kind of out there. But, again, are you going to get back equal value for him? And you don't really make a trade if you feel like you're getting equal value. You want to get better value, So those are some things facing the Hawks. To me, it seems like obviously Capella's a starter in the NBA, but guys like DeAndre Hunter, Bogdanovich, there's a few guys in the Hawks rotation that it's like, are they a starter or are they reserve on a winning team? And I think the Hawks are kind of figuring that out too. And you could do a lot worse than the situation that they're in right now with, the starting 5 that they're probably going to, I don't want to say probably go into the season with, but as the starting 5 looks today, you could do a lot worse. Are they, obviously the East is super tough, but they're still, I would think, going to be in that 7-8 range right now. So, there's still moves that could potentially be made, maybe lift them up a little bit. But I mean, you're talking about, the teams that obviously have Philly. I think Milwaukee's going to be back. Obviously the defending champion Boston Celtics. The Knicks look unbelievable. So there's 4 right there. The Cavs, the Magic, there's 6. And the Pacers went to the Eastern Conference Finals. There's 7. So, I mean, who is Atlanta and how are they going to be able to pass one of those teams, or they decide, you know what, we're just going to, hope for next 3 or 4 years we're able to acquire some picks and wait it out a little bit. They're in a very interesting spot because they are kind of right there in the middle of the Eastern Conference and could go one way or the other, and be interesting to see which route they take. And I know you're going to ask me about Trae Young, but I hope for their sake that they continue to keep him and build around him. I think that he and Snyder work very well together, and it's hard to find players like Trae Young. I know he takes grief from people around the league, or he's not a great defender or whatever. And I'm just like, to me, he is one of the most dynamic players in the NBA, and you just got to put people around him and people who fit around him. And I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, somebody like so you mentioned Trae already. Because I was about to ask you about Trae, because I think one thing about Trae Young is, like you said, he kind of gets this bad rep. I know a lot of people talk about the USA team and like, how does he not make the team and da 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 da. And obviously we know about the All-Star game this past year, second in fan voting, I believe, second or third in fan voting, but still didn't make it till someone got hurt as a replacement. There's this perception in the league that the league does not value Trae Young or does not see him as highly. And one of those reasons is because he's in Atlanta, because Atlanta universally in basketball circles is not a respected franchise, I guess. So that's what hurts him. But at the same time, if you actually watch and pay attention, you see the value he brings to the table. So what I wanted you to kind of go a little bit deeper into is about just how you, like I said, you view Trae in the grand scheme of things. And is the criticism, is the views of him warranted? Are they fair? And just everything like that surrounding him, because, people, there are people who feel like, oh, when they were talking about Trae rumors, oh, there's not a lot of interest. DJ has more interest, things of that nature. And so is it Trae Young's not a valuable player in this game? Is he not liked in this game, et cetera, et cetera? So yeah, just overall, like, what is your overall opinion of just Trae Young, the player, especially from when he came into the league to now?
Yeah, no, to me, he's, I don't understand that. I don't understand the criticism. To me, you're talking about an elite scorer, a guy who racks up assists. He's not a selfish player. I don't know why sometimes it seems like he gets that reputation. Definitely not. And to me, you're right. I mean, you think about the Hawks, obviously not one of the NBA's more noted traditional, powers, so to speak. But to me, I just look at it like, off the top of my head, how many point guards and guards overall can I think better than Trae Young? To me, he's in the top 5, maybe top, if you want to say he's worse than that, top 7 or 8. But to me, I just think if he were in a different market, he would probably be even more scrutinized and criticized, but I think he would also get way more praise. And I just think it's rare that you're able to find a guy who can be the face of your franchise for a long time. He's still in his prime right now. He's a dynamic scorer. And, the NBA, that's what it's all about, putting the ball in the hoop and finding ways to put the ball in the basket. And he does that not just by scoring, but obviously his assist numbers are always high. So I just don't get it. And I think I'm hopeful for his sake and for the Hawks' sake that they continue to stay together, because I just think, probably really, if you can think of guys who are synonymous with the Hawks, I mean, you go like Dominique Wilkins, and Trae Young. To me, Trae Young's the new guy that you build your team around and wait to see what happens. But because remember, this is a guy who led this team to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple years ago, before Dejounte Murray. And I would say they're not much worse now than they were, the team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think Jalen Johnson has a higher upside, obviously, than John Collins, who was on that team. So to me, it's like he can take the team places. He kind of reminds me of Allen Iverson in that sense, where it's like, he's got that determination, he's got that fire, and he's got the ability to beat teams 1-on-5 sometimes. So, to me, I just think he's an invaluable and unfairly criticized player who, he's one of my favorite, I'm an older guy, so it's hard for me to say, oh, he's my favorite player. But he's really one of my favorite players to watch. I love watching the guy, and I love watching. And that's a big part of what you're doing if you're the Atlanta Hawks or any NBA team. You want to have a guy that people are willing to pay to see, and he's one of those players. I mean, probably one of the top 10 players in the league when it comes to that, But again, I know that the Hawks can be sometimes a hard sell in Atlanta. I know that, and to me, it'd be a mistake to trade him. I think that you should just continue to ride that as long as you can, and let him know how much you appreciate him, and see how far he can carry you. And I know he's had issues with coaches in the past, but now it seems like he's got a great relationship with Quin Snyder, and I think that if your star player and your coach see eye to eye, that can take you places, because then the star player, the other guys respect him, so they're gonna follow along. It's really when your star player and the coach have a problem, then everything turns into a mess. So I think that they're off to a good start there with Quin Snyder and Trae Young together. So to me, look, bona fide all-star, and I don't think you get back anything close to him if you decided to trade him off.
Yeah, Sam, I think with Trae Young, I feel like him and Atlanta were kind of a perfect match in regards to how the basketball world views Atlanta, then how the basketball world views Trae Young, and kind of both look down upon, a little bit in the grand scheme of things. And so I think it kind of makes maybe for a perfect match in that regard. But one thing that you mentioned, obviously, is the ascension of Jalen Johnson. I just want to get your thoughts on him. I think some people are wondering, depending if they don't acquire another, I guess, strong offensive option this offseason, seems like they're setting up Jalen Johnson to now going into his fourth year to be the second guy and for him to take that next jump. So I just want to get your thoughts on what do you think of Jalen Johnson, obviously breaking out this past year. Some people believe if he didn't have missed so many games, he would have been the most improved player of the year in overall. So yeah, what do you think of Jalen Johnson's prospects coming into this next season?
Yeah, I think that's just it. I mean, maybe he's your number two guy, number two option. Certainly looked like he could develop into that, even while he was, really number three behind, when healthy, behind Young and Murray. Probably going to get more touches as they're currently constructed, and really, after those at least the first year, you're kind of thinking, boy, I don't know what this guy's, looks like another one of those Duke flops kind of guy. And, but really just came on strong in terms of his comfort level. Perhaps, and I've always thought Nate McMillan was a great coach. I kind of question that move, but it seems like, sometimes different coaches and their different voices are better for different players. And Jalen Johnson was just going to grow into a good player, it seemed like, regardless of who the coach was. But I think that Quin Snyder has been a good fit for him, a good match, and really helped. The whole staff really there has helped him quite a bit. So I just think that, look, maybe you're looking at a potential number two guy, who really seemed at one point, really before the injuries, that is this guy going to be an all-star someday? He started to show that type of potential. So, maybe the Hawks are banking on his continued development and growth. And if so, it's like getting a whole new player. It's like you went out and traded for somebody almost, as long as he can continue this upward trajectory. So, look, to me, that's a big sign. What he does, assuming you keep Trae Young, what Jalen Johnson does, maybe this is the guy that's helping you get to new heights and becoming that number two option that you really have kind of been clamoring for, who's a fit. And there's every reason to believe and have high hopes in Johnson potentially turning into that guy.
Yeah, and I think that's, like I say, he's someone the Hawks fans are very excited about, a guy who, like I said, showed flashes. I mean, I sometimes said when you watched him, if you didn't watch basketball and you was turned into a game, he's that type of player I say you would be like, he gives off like really good player energy. Like, he doesn't seem like, oh yeah, he's just out there, and I think that's what is most exciting. I mean, I remember people were having comparisons about like, what is the ceiling? I mean, I'm seeing Scottie Pippen. I mean, even some people mention LeBron. Like, some people just, because they're seeing Dunk can pass, because that's a very underrated part of his game. Can finish at the rim and stuff. And just for him, the biggest thing I've always said is just confidence, instilling confidence into him, playing, using your size to your advantage, and just really putting it all together. And that's something that he'll continue to do through the process with getting more experience. But, speaking from one young player to the next, Hawks drafted Zacharias Richeche as the first pick in the NBA draft this past year. And Summer League is coming up. Hawks play I believe, start Summer League play this Friday for them. And Kobe Buffkin, another guy they're expecting to step up, is going to play. Muhammad Gay as well, because just to name a few. What is the one, or what is one thing maybe you want to see during summer? I know summer league's a weird time because, we'll see players struggle, then they'll be fine and things of that nature. But, I don't know how much you pay attention to Richeche through the process. Obviously, we heard a lot about him during the process, but, what would you want to see from him going into his first, minutes as an NBA basketball player in the summer league, playing with, like I said, some guys from last year's draft class that people are high on as well?
Yeah, it's funny that we've gone this far without talking about the number 1 overall pick in the draft. I mean, he just doesn't have that kind of buzz about him as previous number ones. But, obviously what you want to see from him is a guy who's very comfortable out there, and maybe not, from the very first tip, but, eventually you want to see a guy who's comfortable, confident, really comes as a complete package as advertised, supposedly can do it all. I mean, great athlete, can handle the ball, can shoot, can drive, can finish, pretty good defender, wing defender type. So, yeah, I mean, obviously super young. And that's always a concern in terms of how much is he going to be able to contribute from day one with the Hawks in the regular season. But, you want to see a guy who's, look, we always say this about NBA players, right? They kind of have that it factor, even when they're not making shots or, look a little clunky out there. For instance, I watched the Lakers summer league team the other day, and, this Dalton Connect, their first round pick, isn't making any shots, but I'm like, yeah, he just looks like an NBA player that's ready to contribute. And I think that's what you want to see from Richeche. It's not about his stats or his final numbers. It's about, how does he move? Is he moving like a guy who's going to be able to contribute right away? Does he have those tools? Is he just doing stuff that separates himself? You can just, simple eye test can show you who's ready for the NBA, on a consistent basis. And I think I think you're going to see that already. But what you want to see is somebody who looks like, yeah, this is going to be a franchise guy at some point, because that's what you want with your number 1 pick. And if all goes well, it looks like a guy who's really going to help the Atlanta Hawks this year. So all of a sudden now you have Trae Young, you have a player on the rise in Jalen Johnson, and now all of a sudden you have a rookie number 1 overall pick who all of a sudden is your number 3 guy who could contribute that way. So, could be positive things for the Hawks without even making another move, depending on the rise of these other young players. So, and you do have the Bogdanoviches and the DeAndre Hunters and the Capellas and, everybody else to kind of fill in around these guys. But, there's some ifs there. And that's anytime you go into a season with ifs, fans overreact and make it sound like they're negatives. But in reality, there's some hope there with the Hawks. And Richeche is obviously, that's what you want to see. Is this guy an NBA-ready player? And how comfortable is he already at such a young age? The nice thing, it'd be great if he dominated, but I don't think anybody expects that. And if that really means a whole lot, what means more is what kind of fit is he going to be and what type of upside is he showing right now?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the next big thing for Hawks fans to tune into. Richeche's debut this Friday. Obviously starting off, I believe they start off against the Wizards. So, that's obviously interesting with the storylines between Sarr and the Hawks and everything that happened between there. So that's definitely going to be an exciting time. And overall, like you said, they have a lot of young players that they are relying on this season to make another step and to help the team. And if that works out, then yeah, you should see the Hawks should maybe be better than last year. But if they don't, then obviously you have to reevaluate and reassess. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Hawks do moving forward. But Sam, I appreciate you coming on to the show. Let people know where they can find you if they want to keep up with your work.
Yeah, hoopswire.com is, I've been running that now for 3 or 4 years, somewhere in there. Before that, I was at Sports Illustrated, Fox Sports, and just broke off on my own and have been running this. Fortunately, all my readers came with me from Fox Sports, but which is great. Made it a full-time job, but it also means, 12, 14-hour days, sometimes weekends, holidays, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. So yeah, hoopswire.com is a website, at Amico Hoops on Twitter, or X as it's called now. Also on Threads at Amico Hoops, and I even have an Amico Hoops Facebook page. So anywhere you can follow me there. I probably, I always say, if you follow me on social media, you better really love basketball, because I never shut up, and we just keep posting away. So it's a lot of fun, and I've had some fun writing about the Hawks. I think they've had a real interesting offseason. As I always remind fans, don't panic too much in July, because they have all the way until February to make a trade, right, Bryce? So, but anyway, it's really cool. I always enjoy the Hawks. As a little boy were my first favorite team, believe it or not. So
yes, sir.
they have a special place in my heart, even though I grew up in Northeast Ohio. So I don't know, make sense of that. But I think I just like their uniforms. But they've always held a special place in my heart because of that. And I was Quin Snyder's roommate at basketball camp. So
really,
yeah,
wow, there's a nugget for you right there.
Yeah, right.
With Quin Snyder in the younger days, huh?
Right.
Okay.
There you go. I can tell you this: he was. There's one thing I remember about him is he could just jump out of the gym. He was 6'1", but had the like a 46-inch vertical back in the day. That's all I remember about. I mean,
Quinn with a vertical, man. We got to bring out the archives. We need to find the archives for this.
yeah. He was a dunking machine. That was something that I remember. Even at 6'1", was dunking over 6'7", 6'8" guys. That was his strong point. I envied him for that, because I got about a 4-inch vertical. So
hey, it's funny you mentioned that. He was like, yeah, he was 6'1" dunking. I was like, shoot, maybe that's why he relates so well to Trae. He's like, listen, I was your height playing basketball, so I understand what you're going through. I can help you. Get an eye here. So yeah, that's cool though. That's cool. That's a fun fact right there. It's a great way to end off the show for sure. But like I said, Sam, I appreciate you coming on. And obviously, guys, but this podcast is available on any podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, whatever. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video, show some love, everything like that. As we continue through this Atlanta Hawks offseason and wait for any other potential moves that potentially could be in the wake moving forward. But next step is Summer League this Friday as the Hawks kick it off, and you get to see #1 overall pick, Ricochet, play in his debut. But that's Sam. I'm Bryce. We'll see you next time.